I present to you Dr. Angela Davis.
Dancers, I thought to myself, I will be more than willing to cede my time to them. I want to begin by acknowledging the indigenous inhabitants of the land on which we should never forget it's interesting that if you hang around long enough, history absolves you, as Fidel Castro once said. There was a time when the fact that I had been placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list really caused people to fear me. And now they applaud. I would like to thank Master Corey Bush and Dr. David Ragland for inviting me to participate in this event, this coming together, and this attempt to engage in truth-telling about violence in America. And I'd like to thank everybody for their amazing presentations, and I should say that I always appreciate the opportunity, which I don't have that often, to listen to my sister speak, even though we live right around the corner from each other. Let me say how honored I feel to be here in this place at this time. This morning, as Tanya said, we visited Ferguson and we touched the ground where Mike Brown was killed. And we followed the path of the protesters. And you should know that I have spoken many times about Mike Brown. And I have spoken many times in many places about Ferguson, both inside and outside the country. And for me, as well as for people throughout the world, the very mention of Ferguson evokes struggle, perseverance, courage, and a collective vision of the future. Last September, I was traveling to a small town in Italy, a town called Savona, a town of about 60,000 people in northwestern Italy, near Genoa. I think its claim to fame is that Columbus lived there for a while, but we can forget about that. In any event, I was invited by a group of people there who had been working to free the Cuban Five, the 5 Cubans who were trying to prevent terrorist attacks on Cuba and were instead themselves arrested on charge of terrorism back in 1998 here in this country. And I should say the last 2 were released last December. And at this very moment, I believe they are in South Africa because the city of Johannesburg has organized these amazing celebrations for them. The point that I'm trying to make is that when I arrived in this relatively small town in Italy, All the people wanted to hear about was Mike Brown and Ferguson. They said, please talk to us about Ferguson. But I had to say, like you, I am deeply inspired by the actions of the protesters in Ferguson. And they said in the small town in Italy that they were inspired to continue to struggle by what you were doing here. And so I am here because I want to thank you, Ferguson activists who refuse to put down the torch of struggle, who made Ferguson a worldwide symbol of resistance. And we did this at a time when we were urged to search for easy solutions, for fast answers, for formulaic resolutions. Ferguson protesters said, no, we will continue to make the issue of violence against Black communities visible. We will not accept a simplistic answer. We will not allow this issue to be buried in the graveyard that has not only claimed Black lives, but also the struggles to defend those lives. So thank you for not giving up, for not going home, for staking our claim to freedom on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, with such great power. With such great power that Ferguson has become synonymous with progressive protests from Palestine to South Africa and indeed all over the world. I am especially moved to be here where it all began almost a year ago. Because if it had not been for Ferguson, we would not have been driven to focus our attention on Eric Garner and Tamir Rice and Walter Scott and Freddie Gray. If it had not been for Ferguson, we would not have remembered Miriam Carey, who was killed by police in Washington, D.C., Rekia Boyd in Chicago, Alicia Thomas in Los Angeles, and so many more. Had it not been for Ferguson protesters who also pointed out that Black women, people of color, and queer communities and Palestinian activists were targets of officially condoned racist violence. Had it not been for Ferguson protesters, we might not have achieved such a broad consciousness of the work that we have to do in order to build a better world. We might not have experienced the terrible tragedy in Charleston in ways that have brought together people all over the world who recognize now that racism is indeed alive and well 15 years into the 21st century. And that we have to focus on more than individual perpetrators, be they police or vigilantes. Our targets have to be more than individuals and symbols. Our targets also have to be structural racism. Structural racism. The violence of structural racism. It is good, I think we should say, that after more than 50 years of openly symbolizing resistance to civil rights, resistance to Black equality, anti-Black and anti-Semitic violence, the Confederate flag finally seems to be on its way out. And I agree with them that I am happy that Bree climbed up the pole and sat down the flag this morning. The flag it's a symbol. And I find it really interesting that in the very last period of the presidency of what we like to call the first African American president, the Pandora's box of racism has been yanked wide open. And of course, many are rushing to try to close it again, as has happened over and over again. When Troy Davis faced the death penalty, we desperately tried to build a movement that was strong enough to save his life, but we did not succeed. Some of you may remember. When Trayvon Martin was killed, the cry, justice for Trayvon Martin, awakened people everywhere to the urgency of building anti-racist movements. But when Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, the movement refused to disband. Even when the police attacked, the movement refused to disband. Even when some people's rage led them to respond in ways that may have been counterproductive. And that almost always happened. The movement still refused to disband. When people tried to discredit the protesters, the movement refused to disband. Even when people asked, where are the leaders? Where are the leaders? The movement said, we are the leaders. We are a leaderful movement. We have collective leadership. The movement said, this is the 21st century. We do not need the traditional male charismatic leader. I love Marvin. I deeply love Malcolm. But this is the 21st century. And we have learned that leadership is not a male prerogative. And I know that many of the brothers in this hall today know that women have always done the work. Am I right? So women should also be in the leadership. Radical women, radical black women, including queer black women. When black women stand up, as they did during the Montgomery bus boycott, as they did during the Black Liberation era, earth-shaking changes can occur. Now, I understand that Hillary Clinton traveled to St. Louis and made her race speech in the vicinity of Ferguson. Were any of you there? And I heard that she proclaimed that all lives matter. I suppose her people failed to explain to her the way universal proclamations like that have always bolstered racism. More often than not, universal categories reveal hidden racial assumptions. You might say that they have been clandestinely racialized. Clandestinely racialized. So that we can speak about the tyranny of the universal. The tyranny of the universal, the violence done to black people and people of color by the fact that the category human has been racially exclusive. And that gender categories have also been clandestinely racialized. I suppose Hillary never heard of the book, All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, but some of us are brave. If all lives really mattered, we would not need to emphatically proclaim Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is a slogan, it's a movement, and it's also an organization. And if you go on the Black Lives Matter website, you see Black women matter, Black girls matter, Black gay lives matter, Black bi lives matter, Black boys matter, Black queer lives matter, Black men matter, Black lesbians matter, Black trans lives matter, Black incarcerated lives matter, Black immigrant lives matter, Black differently able lives matter. Yes, Black lives matter, Latino, Asian American, Native American, Muslim, poor, and working class people's lives matter. That is what this movement is all about. At the funeral in Charleston yesterday, Reverend Clemente Pinckney's funeral, Obama, maybe he'll become a preacher when he leaves office. Seems like he really wants to let Pastor Corey pass judgment here. But I do want to take issue with something that he said when he explained that if we want to be successful in our struggle against racism, we can't say that we need more conversations about race. We don't need more talk, he said. Obviously, we need a lot more than talk. We need a great deal more than talk. But we also need to learn how to talk about race and racism. We don't even have a vocabulary that permits us to engage in insightful conversations. And it is precisely this lack of a vocabulary and the shallow consciousness of racism that is promoted by the society that makes it possible for us to assume that, for example, changes in the law automatically bring about changes in the real world. That when slavery is abolished in the Constitution, through a constitutional amendment, that somehow or another, just because of an amendment that's a couple of lines long, an institution that so thoroughly permeated life in the U.S. that it suddenly falls away and disappears. The vestiges of slavery are still with us. Slavery was never fully abolished. Civil rights. But it's still the case that many Black black people can't vote. And civil rights, and believe me, I was a part of and supported what we call the civil rights movement, but civil rights did not create jobs, did not create better housing, did not create the education that we need, did not create the health care we need. So it's important, but it's also absolutely essential to say that civil rights is not the whole story. It was a part of the freedom struggle, but it certainly did not mark the triumph of the movement. And one might also say about the Supreme Court decision yesterday regarding marriage equality. While we celebrate civil rights as it is extended to LGBTQ communities, and certainly marriage equality is important, but at the same time, we have to be willing to ask, what is the institution of marriage all about? It's a capitalist institution. It's not the distribution of property. And I wonder why it has been so easy to forget those important critiques of the institution of marriage and treat it as if to extend the right to marry to a population previously excluded from that institution is fundamental progress. Well, it's progress. And let me say, and I know I'm over time. Now, I always like to point out that feminism allows us to work productively with contradictions, to navigate contradictions in ways that we are not compelled to choose one or the other. And so we can say that we celebrate marriage equality, and at the same time, we want to call for a radical critique of the institution of marriage. Because in the final analysis, and I'll just say this outright, I've been a communist for the vast majority of my life. And I'm not willing to give up on our struggle to dismantle capitalism. The inability to understand racism leads to the assumption that there's a phenomenon that is called black-on-black crime. And I really appreciate your remarks, Imani. And that this has nothing to do with racism, that somehow or another, black people are intrinsically inclined to crime. Frederick Douglass said many years ago that there's this tendency to impute crime to color, that criminalization has been a part of the ways in which black people in this country have been racialized. And that is one of the major violences of racism, because we can talk about multiple modes of violence, but a major mode of violence is the rearing of generations of black people who have not been allowed to imagine the future, who have not been allowed to have access to the education that would encourage them to imagine the future. This is a violence, a form of violence that leads to other forms of violence. Violence against children, violence against partners, violence against friends. Before I conclude, and I'm already 5 minutes over time, I want to talk about the global reach of our struggle, of anti-racist struggle. We've evoked Palestine, and what has been so beautiful about the way in which this movement has unfolded are the connections across national borders, and particularly the connections with those who are struggling against the occupation in Palestine. And I also wanted to point to another struggle in Colombia, a struggle that has been embraced by the Black Lives Matter organization. It's the struggle to defend people of African heritage who inhabit a space where they have lived since the 1600s, when they were basically kidnapped from Africa and brought to Colombia and forced to engage in gold mining. They became maroons, they became fugitive slaves and created their own community and did their own gold mining and have survived over the last decades and centuries by mining for gold. And when I talk about this, I have to say, you imagine gold mining as being something that men do, right? As being something that requires a lot of machinery. They don't use any machinery at all. Of course, the men mine, but the women also mine. And the children mine. When I was in Colombia, I was talking to a woman and I said, "How long have you been a miner?" And she said, I have been a miner since I was in my mother's womb. So they have this relationship to the land that is so beautiful. They don't destroy the landscape, but they engage in mining that is respectful of the earth, that is respectful of the planet. And of course, you know that the story I'm about to tell you is not a beautiful story. It's a story of the multinational mining companies receiving licenses from the Colombian government to mine their land, even though they have purchased their land. They have papers to prove that they own the land. They do not own the subsoil. They do not own the minerals. And so they are asking for our solidarity and our help. A young woman by the name of Francia Marquez, whom I've met on a number of occasions, she is one of the most powerful women I've ever met. She's about this tall. She led a women's march to Bogota recently, and she said at first no one would come with her. And she said to them, if no one comes, and this is like 200 miles away. She said, if no one comes with me, I am marching to Bogota with my 2 sons. And she started off on that march with her sons. And 15 other women joined her. And then eventually 50 women joined her. And by the time they got to Bogota, I think there were some 200 women who participated in the occupation of governmental space there. You can find her story online. You can Google Francia Marquez, women in defense of our rights and our ancestral territories, I think. And there's also a GoFundMe. So if you want to contribute something to that movement, you can look it up through Black Lives Matter. And I should say that she's no longer able to go home right now because the paramilitaries have threatened her life. They have told her that if she tries to go home, which is the top of a mountain in the area of Cali, that she will be killed. So I want us to think about this movement as a part of global struggles, as a part of struggles of immigrant people all over the world. There are some 60 million displaced people, deterritorialized people in the world. But also I think we have to abolish policing and imprisonment as we know. And I want to conclude by saying that as radical activists, we really have to begin to learn how to demand what we really want. Not only what we think we can get. Not only what we think we can get, but what we really want. Because if we don't articulate what we want, then eventually we forget. And we believe that actually we were really only talking about a better police force. Or prisons that aren't so inhumane. We have to demilitarize the police. That's a really radical demand that came from right here in Ferguson. Yeah. Demilitarize the police. But I think that we can go a bit further if we want to talk about what we want, if we want to talk about addressing the vast problem of violence. We can talk about disarming the police. And maybe we should just disarm everybody. Disarm everybody. So that's what I wanted to tell Obama, that yes, gun regulation is important, but what about the guns that are still in the hands of the police and the military? Then I think we have to abolish imprisonment as the dominant mode of punishment. I've been talking about this for so long that I sound like a broken record to myself. But let me just conclude on this note. Let us learn how to ask for what we want, not for what we think will be offered to us. Thank you very much.